Probably one of the most remarkable things that I've discovered whilst making this documentary on the bodhrán is the sheer number of different theories as to where the bodhrán actually came from.
Well, it's a tambourine. The tambourine and the bar, they're both vertical drums.
I hear a lot of stories, for instance, that the bodhrán was used when England ruled Ireland. But they had the bodhrán in the kitchen with potatoes and a bone on a shelf. But at night time, that was a musical instrument.
Wherever your curiosity on this question leaves you or your conclusions lie, what is undeniable is the explosion of the drum's rapid development in the middle of the 20th century. It would be easy to attribute the drum's growth during this period to the flourishing revival of Irish traditional music, but my research has identified a much more nuanced story. And you're saying this is 50 odd years old, this drum?
52 or 53 or more.
In this second part of my documentary series, digging into the story of the bodhrán, we will explore a sequence of events in Ireland during the middle of the 20th century, which triggered a bodhrán revolution. Many of the early stories from this period about the bodhrán lead us to the north of County Kerry, known as the Kingdom of Ireland, specifically the small market town of Listowel, positioned on the River Feel and famed for the many Irish literary icons who came from or made their home in Listowel, not least the playwright John B Keane, born here in 1928, who was particularly inspired by the bodhrán makers and players who lived here.
I do most of my writing here in this room. I'm never stuck for ideas actually, because all I have to do is look out the window and I can see the various quirks and the little peculiarities of the people that pass to and fro. I never deal with them sarcastically or harshly, but lovingly, I hope. I try to bring out the humorous aspect of life as I see it down there in that street.
His stories, which captured the truth, wit and charisma of times gone by, chimed with a global audience, and success followed. Though it was his love of the Irish drum, which he initially referred to as the tambourine, that changed the course of bodhrán history.
More drums, tambourines louder, louder, that's it.
He had a pub here in Listowel since 1955, and in fact it's just around the corner. It's still run by his son Billy. So I'm going to meet with Billy to ask him about the tradition of bodhrán playing here in Listowel, see if we can unearth a few more of those stories about some of the iconic makers from the area.
So we're here behind the bar in John B Keane's, where I pull pints 364 days a year. And this is, as they call it around here, a mural. People don't say mural here, they use the word mural. And it was painted by a girl called Moira Ryan. And Moira was commissioned by my dad to paint the scene from his play Sive, which was the play that brought the bodhrán back into contemporary Irish music.
The bodhrán plays an important role in Sive in both building and breaking tension through the drama's dark themes, where Sive, a young schoolgirl, is forced into an arranged marriage with a rich and lecherous old man.
It was a very powerful statement that young girls shouldn't be forced to marry an older man. And what was that? 1958, it was first produced here in Listowel.
The Abbey Theatre in Dublin following, confirming John B Keane's star as an acclaimed playwright, was born.
The bodhrán was being played here from when we were small boys. We lived upstairs, my two brothers and my sister, dad and mam, and you could hear the bodhrán playing going on down here when we were supposed to be asleep at night. But we slept, you know, even though there could be thunderous bodhrán players. There was a group called the Bodhrán Boys, and Sonny Caniffe was the bodhrán maker, and he was the leader, dictator of the Bodhrán Boys.
Sonny, yeah. We saw you testing it there over at the fire, warming it up. How can you tell when the sound is right?
You can know by the tone. See the tone.
Well, now, when you make them,
how
long is it before you get the tone right?
Oh, it takes 4 days anyway. 4 days before they be properly toned.
My dad had this wonderful gift of attracting characters, and Caniffe was a character, and then some.
Hey! Okay! What's troubling you?
I tell you what's troubling you.
Yeah. I had a letter from a fellow this morning in Chicago.
I do.
And he wants information about the bodhran, this book here.
Yeah.
He's writing a book about the origins of drums.
I thought he was going to come to buy one.
Oh no, he'll be coming. But will you talk to him when he comes?
I will, of course, by all means.
Now, do you see this instrument here?
Yeah.
Now, we were bodhran agents for Sonny, because people were always coming looking for bodhrans in this place. But he did well out of the bodhrans here, and of course my dad could sell a bodhran, a wind section in an orchestra. He was so good at it. He kept a herd of semi-wild goats in the bog all around Derra where he lived. They just wandered around the bogs and they fed themselves off the heather, and they milked the goats as well for goat's milk. And Sonny swore by the goat's milk. He said it was an aphrodisiac.
There's a certain Arab in the bog.
An Arab?
Yes,
Herb, yeah.
You would know it's an Arab or a herb.
Yeah.
But the goats always pick it up.
Yeah.
And the goat's milk.
And it's good for sex?
Oh, sex, because there was an old lad there, back there. He was 101 years.
Yeah.
And he was so sexy they had to lock him up.
After the goat's milk?
After the goat's milk.
Well, yeah. Do you remember the tambourine you made for side?
Yeah, I said it.
Oh, Mike Levin, you the man, you was always in the van. Made an open door to old man and got so may white snuff be at your way. Conny cake, and the plenty on your table in some.
Sonny brought so much joy and life into what was essentially an area where people were dying off, and you know, there are still some people living there, but the old way of life, the small farms, you know, planting a few potatoes on an acre, making a bit of money from the bog, still goes on to an extent. But that time there was hundreds of people living in Derra. Now there's just a few. But so it was the end of an era, but it was also like the end of all great civilizations. The end was also the high point, and that's where Sonny came in. He was there when it was at its very, very best.
What more is there to do but visit the Derra Bog, where Sonny lived, his wild goats roamed, and where the magic of his bodhran making all took place. Sonny's daughter Kathleen still lives on the bog, and she is the second youngest of Sonny's 21 children, and the protector of what is maybe one of the last of Sonny's drums.
I suppose it was made over 50 years ago or more.
My God.
But as I said, I kept it well.
You looked after it.
The tone, he used to always go for my father, you know.
The tone, so
the tone, yeah.
Kind of an earthy warmness to it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And do you remember him making the drums when you were growing up?
I do. He used to get me to put on the little corks and bottles on the side of it. And that, you know.
My God. Happy memories.
Happy memories, yeah. He used to kill the goat and then he'd bury it in lime for about 3 weeks. And then take it up, we'll say, and skin it off, we'll say. And put it on the bodhran on a sieve. This is a sieve. That, you know. I used to watch him doing it, you know.
Yeah.
I always had great interest, we'll say, in what he was doing. Well, I love to just take it out and have a look at it from time to time. You know, it brings back a lot of memories and that, you know.
Yeah.
And that, but what can you do? You just carry on and that's it.
Kathleen was kind enough to let me tip out a few rhythms on Sonny's bodhran, and it felt like a privilege to play such an old and important instrument. Wow, this is the real deal. An original Sonny Caniffe bodhran. Kathleen, what can I say? Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think the bodhran was popular, say, in North Kerry and West Limerick. I think a lot of it was the ritual of making the bodhran. It was elemental. It was part of where they came from, part of food chain, if you call it that. I think there was a certain fun in it, a respect, and that it wasn't just something you bought off a shelf, that it had to be made, it had to be nurtured, cared for, and there was huge skills, traditional skills involved that were intergenerational. I think that was a big part of it, that it was worthwhile.
bodhran's role centre stage in Sive's first national performance at the Abbey Theatre in Dublin in 1959 caught the attention of the Abbey's musical director at the time, Seán Ó Riada. It's hard to know where to begin whilst describing or characterising the importance of Seán Ó Riada's influence in Irish musical life. Specifically in relation to the bodhrán, he was the first musician to give it a role, and I suppose a reverence too, alongside the pre-existing lineup of traditional Irish instruments. I met with Malachy Kearns, one of Ireland's best known makers, who shared with me a letter from John B Keane sent 2 years before his death, which attributes a direct connection between the bodhrán and Sive and Ó Riada's fervent interest in the drum.
This is the one, like, see from John B, right? Of all, however, is Johnny Cahill's story of meeting with Seán Ó Riada when the Listowel drama group were at the Abbey Theatre in 1959. Ó Riada was the leader of the Abbey Orchestra at the time, and he approached Johnny after he told him he'd never seen the bodhrán before. He was intrigued by it.
In terms of evidence, this is maybe as close as we can get to establishing a direct link between Sive and Ó Riada's first awareness of the drum. The following year he founded Ruairi Glasheen, an iconic traditional Irish group in which he played the bodhrán. To find out more about Ó Riada's connection with the drum, I met Mel Mercier, an acclaimed bodhrán and bones player, composer and academic who has a particularly special connection to Ó Riada.
He viewed it as something that would bring the pulse of the music into the musical picture, and the colour of the instrument. And he was as interested, I think, in it for its distinctive Irishness as he was about, more interested in that than he was in the technique. In my own listening to Ó Riada and Ruairi Glasheen over the years, and Ó Riada's playing, is that he had a very particular feel for rhythm. And you hear it in his playing on some of the recordings, not least, for example, when he's playing the bodhrán on the soundtrack for The Playboy of the Western World. There is a kind of push and a pull and a cadence in his playing that's really quite unique to him. It's unlike any bodhrán playing that you find now. The other thing about Ó Riada's rhythm is that it was never really too fast. The momentum of it is extraordinary. I mean, it's really, really, really powerful. Like, you wouldn't want to get in the way of that, and yet it's not that fast. So there's something about the momentum and the weight as well, I think, of Ó Riada's music and the tempo that group of musicians took it, which is also really quite distinctive and fascinating. Of course, nobody continued to play the way that Ó Riada played it. What happened was that Seán Ó Riada led the group from the bodhrán, which I think is an extraordinary thing, and we need to remind ourselves of that this drum, which was up to that point not considered to be a musical instrument, suddenly was in the hands of this musician who had the nation's ear. And he chose to create his prototype of a traditional music and led it with this instrument.
As the group's recognition grew, Ó Riada moved to lead the group from the harpsichord and introduced Mel's father, Padder Mercier, to the lineup to play bodhrán. Padder is considered to be the first professional bodhrán player, pushing the boundaries of the drum's musical capabilities and inspiring a whole new generation of bodhrán players.
When my father began playing in his 40s, which was sometime in the 1950s, there were no other bodhrán players to act as role models, because effectively the bodhrán wasn't really considered, certainly not widely, to be a musical instrument. You could hear it at gatherings, musical gatherings like Festina and Flaciols and things like that, or just where people gathered to sing and to play and to dance. And so you could find bodhrans, particularly in bodhrans in rural areas. But there was no real sense that it was a musical instrument. So my father picked it up in that kind of environment, which was within the context of the Irish language. And he ended up in that environment, or chose to be in that world, following the language, his love of the language. And yet somehow or other, in his early 20s, he seems to have turned west, is the way I think of it, towards Connemara. He went to Connemara as Herbert Peter Mercier, M-E-R-C-E-R. In a way, he came back from Connemara as Pather Mercier. And it was in that milieu, I suppose, of the language and the music in Ireland at that time. And it was in that context, I think, that my father started to play the bodhrán. He may have seen some people playing, and he picked it up himself. So he was entirely self-taught, as anybody playing that instrument was. The concept of getting lessons on the bodhrán was, you know, it never entered anybody's head. Because people probably thought there was nothing to learn.
During the late 1960s, Pather Mercier joined the Chieftains, probably the singularly most influential Irish music group globally, and became the first full-time bodhrán player.
I've got to look at this. Look. Oh, wow. So there's one of the drums and of course, you know, when they went professional and they got a manager and they were playing in America and they went on tours. You know, this could have been like the Rolling Stones, except it was the Chieftains.
Sure, you'd have to have it on the bass drum, but when you don't have a bass drum, you put it on the bodhrán.
You put it on the bodhrán, so that my father would sit down on the ground. But of course, you can see these are old style, so it looks like it's been made out of a domestic or farm tray, yeah. And so the old style bodhráns were like that. And they would invariably have some kind of crossbar, a bit of wire, something on it, and so you'd hold it. So for the wren, which, you know, if you're playing outdoors, well, if you're crossing down the roads or across the fields, you want the instrument to be heard, yeah? So you'd hold it by that, and the skin would be very tight and big sound. The instrument was probably, in many ways, an outdoor instrument, yeah, at least in that context. But when Ó Riada brought it up on the stage, and then when the Chieftains also included it in their lineup, it became an indoor instrument. Mm. And it went up on the stage and indoors. And now it was an ensemble instrument. The aesthetic had to change. There was now a different kind of sensibility around the arrangement. So getting the balance right between the whistle and the bodhrán and the flute and the fiddles and the pipes and things like that. So that was a new kind of challenge for bodhrán players. So one of the things that my father did, because this is long before, well, not that long, but before anybody started putting their hand on the back of the drum to dampen down the skin and bring the level down. So what my father did was he took one drum and he did two things. He put a second skin on it. He taped it on. Yeah? Because that would dampen down, it would make it more muted, yeah, make it a kind of richer sound. And then he took that drum and he slotted it inside another one so that you got a more bassy kind of sound. Look, there, you can see it here as well. I don't know if you can see that in the image there. That's that drum there. Gosh. Yeah. And, you know, there's very little romance like in it, you know. I mean, it's covered in tape.
Another central character in the story during this period is Mícheál Ó Suilleabháin, a musician, composer and academic who himself was a student of Seán Ó Riada. He conducted fieldwork on the bodhrán between 1971 and 1981, resulting in the first book published on the drum, and had a long creative collaboration with Mel.
Mícheál spoke about what he described as the folkloric tradition of the instrument. And in that, of course, he was referring to the role of the drum in, for example, the hunting of the wren, where it had and still has, although perhaps to a lesser extent now, a kind of ritualistic role, which, if you wanted to push it, raises interesting questions about the instrument itself, you know, like this instrument, you know, the frame drum itself. There can be a ritualistic dimension, almost kind of magical dimension to the instrument. It's not something that we associate with it in Ireland, but if you look at it in the context of the wren, you might be tempted to think that there are vestiges there of some kind of additional kind of role or power. The picture I have had since I began playing music is of my father on the edge of a semicircle. So the instrument itself and the player of the instrument being on the edge. And of course, I think what I've discovered is that in most things in my life, I'm most comfortable on the edge. It's a very creative place. So I think that's partly, for me, the broader resonances of having, lived a life with that instrument on my lap. So it has really come along with me, or almost led, or opened doors for me, or led me on that journey.
Padder Mercier didn't just inspire and influence a generation of professional and amateur bodhrán players during this time, but also the bodhrán makers too.
I lived beside Padder Mercier. He was one of the founders of the Chieftains. And at that time, the bodhrán used to be just tapped on stage, held up and tapped mainly. That was kind of the playing. But Padder started it all where, the unique technique of bodhrán playing with the slow, controlled rhythms and variations in tone with the one hand behind the skin and all that. He was a master at that, and he was slowly showing me all of these things. Padder used to come here and sit outside, and he'd be showing somebody how to play the bodhrán, and years later somebody would say, I didn't realise I was being taught by Padder Mercier that day when I called to your shop. But that's the kind of man, he always added to somebody's life every day.
Malachy has been making drums in Roundstone, County Galway for 40 years, and at its high point producing 10,000 bodhráns a year to people all over the world. Surely a sign that this bodhrán revolution was in full swing. But why?
The Irish love the bodhrán. You see, it's more than a musical instrument to the Irish as well. It's kind of like a victory symbol, because if you look at the harp as a national symbol on government matters, But the bodhrán is more of an Irish symbol in the hearts of Irish people.
You've got the factory here
as
well in Roundstone.
Here's the workshop, yeah.
It would be incredible to get a glimpse, without capturing too many of your secrets, Malachy,
Well, there isn't that much secrets, it's just work.
Yeah, maybe that's the biggest secret of all, the graft.
It's just keep doing it, like the ocean, in and out, keep doing it every day, continue to continue. There's the moulds now. We just see them everywhere, they're here. We steam and bend the timber. There's no secret in that, you just steam it and bend it. And it would be easier here. A lot of the younger lads would have worked on boats with their parents, when they were young, and they've been leaning towards that. In the early days, when I started from Dublin, Padder Mercier was very helpful to me. But I also constantly went to see Davy Gunn, he's called in Dua in Listowel, North Kerry. He was a bodhrán maker. And he helped me a lot to get into it all and do it. And I'd make some rims for him, and then he'd help me with skins and so on.
Back at John B Keane's in Listowel, Billy Keane also remembers Davy Gunn's bodhrán making.
Davy also used this place as a bodhrán emporium. He was a genius at bodhrán. Some people say Davy's bodhráns were the best of all. Davy was a technician. A bodhrán technician. He got it just right. He was a bodhrán player's bodhrán maker. Mamie Gunn was an integral part of the Davy Gunn bodhrán operation. And she kept an eye on things. She was a very meticulous woman. She entertained people when they came out, the bodhrán buyers, and she loved the company, and they'd get the dinner if they came at the right time. And she was very much there with Davy, and she would help him with the work. There was a lot of stretching, and it needed two people at times. So Mamie worked very much in tandem with Davy. Mamie would spot if the bodhrán was overstretched, and she'd know, and she could play it. And the two of them were a wonderful team.
Similarly, in Roundstone, Malachy's bodhrán making operation is very much a team effort between he and his wife Gifty, who has a remarkable story into the world of the bodhrán.
I learned how to play the bodhrán my own way because, I'm a Ghanaian born child and there's a rhythm flowing in my blood.
Absolutely. How did you find yourself out in Roundstone?
It's a long story. I came to Ireland because I I was made to relocate my environment. I lost my parents, both of them in the same year, and knowingly or not knowingly, I was traumatized. So it kind of depressed my life, my work, everything affected me in a way that I was advised to relocate. So I decided to travel. My journey detoured through Holland, and I realized I was carrying a baby. So I had my son, Jason, in Holland. I decided to detour my journey again to Ireland. I arrived here and I went to the Department of Justice, and I was allocated to Clifton. So this August past will be exactly 21 years. Christmas 2000, Santa Claus came to the hostel. This is the story. Yeah, and I was told to come out because it's Christmas. And you know, Christmas home is family. But over here, it was just me and my baby in the room. Oh, it was a beautiful place, I won't complain. It was a very beautiful gesture given to us.
Santa Claus came.
Santa Claus came to the hostel, and...
If you believe in Santa Claus, lots of good things can happen.
You arrived at exactly the right time, Malachy.
Yeah.
Oh.
And, you know, the rest is fairy tale.
Oh.
But when I arrived here, for me, I was told we were going to the west of Ireland. Where is the west of Ireland? Those days, it's like 6.5 hours drive from Dublin to Clifton. So this huge bus that was supposed to bring like 50 or 45 people was empty. It was just me and my baby. After all the journey, when we got to Mam Cross, I felt a huge, big arm. It's very big. I mean, today, the reason why I've come to love this place, this arm big up there on the mountain just said, "You're welcome home." This is what I heard. It was so real. And I held my baby. I picked up my baby and I said to him, "Honey, we are home." So for us to arrive here, it was a real home. The Bodhrán, it's like carrying my own baby close to my heart, and I feel the heartbeats of that baby. And it's so beautiful.
Hey everyone, and thank you so much for checking out the second part of my Bodhrán documentary. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also check out the third part of the series right over here, which is all about the iconic Bodhrán makers in Ireland over the last 100 or so years. So hopefully see you in part 3. Take care, all the best.